May
Um,
I ask you a question about the underpainting?
yes,
What do you use? What is the primer that you use?
yes, I have it all ready because I knew people would be asking. Um, I have like here's a good example of one. This gold color is this quinacridone nickel azo gold fluid acrylic color. And all of you ladies that paid for today, you'll get this recording anyway. So if
Hmm.
I talk too fast or if I go through this too quickly, you can catch it on the recording. I'll try to edit the recording in the next couple days and get that out to you. Um, but anyway, it's that acrylic color mixed with
Pastel
pastel
ground.
ground or the fine pumice gel. I have a big tub of the fine pumice gel down there, which is actually what I'm
Hmm.
using, but this is very similar, very similar products. It's a clear pumice sort of acrylic gel medium, so it has grit to it. So when I add the color to that, I get this mixture, which
Hmm.
looks kind of dark, but it goes on this transparent. And
Yeah, I see.
yeah, a single layer is like this tone over here,
Uh-huh.
and then a double layer is like up here. So it gets a little darker, and then in here in the face I have like a little bit more, like a third little layer. And then the terracotta color in the darker bits is just the Art Spectrum brand multimedia and pastel primer. And this is very similar to this other mixture with the pumice. It's got the pumice in there
Hmm.
already, and it's all ready to go. And it's a little bit more opaque. So when it goes on, it's a little, you know, it's not quite as transparent. Well, sometimes I spread it out and dry brush it. But anyway, that's how I do my underpaintings.
And you apply in regular, what kind of surface?
I'm applying it to gator board.
Gator board, okay.
Yeah, I like gator board because it's rigid, and then you don't need any
Hmm.
backing board. You can just put the glass on there and pop it into a frame, ready to go.
Do you ever use canvas, or is that not
I've not
possible with
used canvas.
pastels?
Honestly, you can put this acrylic stuff on anything,
Oh, okay.
anything. The reason I don't like using canvas is because canvas has a texture to it already.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I like creating my own texture with the brush strokes of the primer that I'm applying. Um,
Okay.
so I like to use a smooth. I like to start with something smooth. That way, when I put this
And
on, it's my brush strokes that I see. And
yeah.
I've done it on other surfaces that already have a texture, like maybe cold pressed watercolor paper that's bumpy. The bumpiness is gonna that'll be the only texture you see, no matter how much of the stuff you put on. You'll just have that paper texture because it'll kind of soak in a
Okay.
little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it works with hot pressed smooth watercolor paper. It works with Yupo. I've done it on Yupo, which is really super smooth. Um, anything anything that's white and smooth. The reason I like this or Yupo is because you don't have to wet it and stretch it and tape it down. You can just
Mm-hmm.
one less step to do.
Is
So
the Gator board archival?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't
Okay.
know. It's a fairly new product. I mean, it's only been around, I don't know, a couple decades or so.
Mhm.
So it's probably too early to make those kinds of tests. But the maker of Gatorboard, of course, the maker of it, says that it's very versatile. It's I don't know if it's acid free, but they say that it's pH neutral.
Okay.
And what I've heard is that if you worry about it, just when you prime your surface, prime the edges as well. Because the surface is a wood resin sort of product, and the interior is that polystyrene or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's the most fragile part. So if you seal that with the acrylic, then what you're painting on is the acrylic. You're not really painting on the gator board.
Right. Right.
Um,
Okay. Thank you.
but I know artists that are all very careful about their having everything archival, and that's fine for them. I just want to paint, and I want it to be easy. And I want it to be, I don't want
Somebody.
to think too hard, and this will. I'm sure this will last longer than me, and will probably last longer than any of the collectors that buy them. If I get so famous that museums have my work, they can preserve
Figure
them.
it out.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
What type of pastel is that? Is that an oil pastel or
No,
what is?
the boy, I could get on my soapbox here with the pastel versus oil pastel. Um, Pastel can also be called dry pastel or soft pastel. Personally, I prefer just calling it pastel because oil pastel came along a long time later, hundreds of years later, and it was named because of its appearance was so similar to pastel. Pastel is a pure powdered pigment held together by a little bit of binder. So it's really the purest of all the mediums. It's got the most pigment to additive ratio. Oil pastel is also a stick, like a pastel is, but it's got an oil base to it. So they're really two completely different mediums. Almost the same as if you were to compare oil paints to watercolors. So, you know, they're not compatible. They're not easy to use together. Although I know some artists that are mixed media artists that would use everything, any kind of thing together. But yeah, oil pastel is just completely different.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
Rita, I'm sorry. I'm curious about the grit of this art spectrum stuff. Is it comparable to like UArt 400 or?
I think UArt will hold quite a bit more than this stuff will.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm used to using Canson. Like, I haven't used Canson in a while, but my early years of pastel usage was just all on Canson. So I'm used to having a fairly light touch. Plus, since I've developed this underpainting technique, I want as much of this underpainting to show as possible along with the pastel. So I don't usually use a lot of pastel on my paintings. And so I don't really need the sort of grit that you can get with UArt or with like that new Chinese paper or with the old Wallace. Those types of sanded papers really just kind of demand a lot of pastel.
Yeah.
And I like them for some things. There's certain pastel commissions. You know, I do like to be able to layer up that much pastel without worrying. But for most of my work where I do underpaintings, I work very lightly with the pastel. And so this is plenty of grit for how I work.
Okay, thanks.
That I see in the
a relevant question. So you would not apply the primer onto sanded paper, right?
I think it would be kind of redundant because the sanded paper is already sanded.
Okay.
So, you know, I would use this primer on a surface that's not sanded. It's not gritty.
Okay.
And I like to use it on as smooth a surface as possible.
Okay. But the underpainting maybe could be applied to just the color, just the tone, the shading.
Yeah, exactly. The sanded papers, if you have like the UArt is like a white or an off-white, or some of those other sanded surfaces that are white or light in value, they take underpaintings. Just like you can use watercolor, you can use this just acrylic wash of color, you can use an oil glazing sort of wash.
I think that my question is, where you have darker tones of underpainting, do you have more grit?
Not really. The terracotta has about the same kind of grit that the golden mixture and the terracotta art spectrum. They have a very similar sort of grit, and you know, it might be that just the single layer of the gold mixture might not have quite as much grit as the additional layers do, but it has enough.
It's not intentional that you want to have it like a thicker grade where you're going to apply darker colors.
What I found that I think it just depends on how thickly you apply it, not really the color of the primer.
Okay.
I have in the past done, you know, experienced areas like on a portrait. I was doing a portrait one time, and I thought that I wanted the skin tone in a certain area to be kind of smooth. So I was smoothing out. I was spreading out the primer, this gold primer, spreading it out very carefully and smoothing it. And then I let it dry. And then when I got around to putting the pastel on, I had very little grit. I had only enough grit for like 1 or 2 layers of pastel. And then I wound up needing more grit. So I had to actually wash off my pastel and apply more primer. So I learned that if, you know, it just depends on how you apply the primer. If you smooth it out and spread it around and smooth it and brush it as it dries, then you're not going to have quite as much grit. But if you put it on and you apply it and just, you know, if you just smooth it out just enough so that you don't have a whole lot of bumps, it'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rita, you mentioned something that they probably don't know. And that's that you said you wash it off. That is like the fantastic
Oh yeah,
thing.
yeah. Well, maybe I'll make a mistake on this, and I'll show you how I fix my mistakes with this sort of primer on here, because this is acrylic. If you mess up something and you say, "Oh gosh, no, that's not working," you just take a wet rag. I usually take a rag and I dip it in some water, and I just scrub off. I just wipe off the pastel right back to the primer. It's great. That's
Yeah,
one of my
I've
favorite
done that a few times.
one of my favorite parts of these materials. Okay, so here's what I do when I'm done is I'll take this off my board and I'll knock it. Now I don't know if you saw little bits of pastel falling off when I did that, but that's pretty much all it needs. You know, because what do you use fixative for if not to keep the pastel on the painting? Well, now it's been knocked. You know, you can do it this way too to get off the excess, and it really didn't change the painting. But now, you know, there's going to be glass. If this happens to fall off somebody's wall, it's still going to look like this because it's already been pounded.
Hi, Rita. I have a question. I have no idea what fixative is. Could you explain that?
Yeah, fixative is a spray that let me get a couple different ones over here. It's a spray that do I still have some that some artists use to, you know, if it comes in really handy for artists that have really thick application of pastel, or there's actually a lot of different uses for it. Here are several different kinds. This is a Lascaux, which is supposed to be one of the best. That won't change the colors. Okay. Here's one that I got at the IAPS convention that they gave me as a sample, and I honestly haven't even tried it yet. But this is one I like to use. Just basic. It's just a basic middle of the line workable fixative. It says workable on there.
Okay, so is it like a varnish?
It's kind of in the same family, but not varnish. You don't use it. You don't use it in place of glass. There's a whole different method for fixing a pastel so that you don't need glass. That's a whole different thing, and I've never actually done it before. But just a fixative, like a workable fixative, is good if, say, you're working on a paper that you can't get wet. So you can't mop up your mistakes with a wet rag. You got to just work on through them. You can brush them off with a dry brush or whatever. If you filled up your tooth on your paper for whatever reason, and you want to be able to get more grit, more stickiness, you can use a workable fixative. And you just give it some light sprays. It'll add more stickiness to your surface.
All right.
Then you can add more pastel.
Okay.
Some people use fixative. A lot of fixatives will darken colors. So knowing that, some artists use that on purpose. When they have an area that maybe just came out a little too light, they don't want to brush off the pastel, they don't want to add more darker pastel, they'll spray it a little bit of fixative on there to darken those colors. Okay. And then also they can then go work on top of that maybe with some darker colors. Sometimes fixative will splatter if it's not a very good quality, or sometimes you can make it splatter depending on how close or how far away you use it. And some artists use that on purpose to get that like rain burst sort of splattering look, I will use fixative only when I have to use on a very large painting, I have to use plexiglass because of the weight issue. I'll use fixative in the center of the artwork just to kind of protect it from that static pull that plexi can get on it, possibly get to keep the pastel from being pulled off by the static of the plexi. And this is the fixative I like. I like this Spectrafix. It's not the same as some of these other alcohol-based or xylene-based or whatever these are that dry really fast and smell bad. This is actually water-based casein. It's casein biopolymer. And it takes longer to dry. And to use it properly, it's best to get their little spray. This is one of their little spray atomizer things. And it sends out a really fine mist. And you spray it like once, and then you let that dry. And you spray it again, and you let it dry. It takes a while, but it's really, really good fixative, that one.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
And I actually have one more question. All I own are oil pastels, so is there like a brand of dry pastel you could recommend for me?
I really recommend anything you can afford that's not too much of a student quality. You want to get the highest quality that you can, even if it's just a very small set of something. And some sets have some brands have half stick sets that are economical. Rembrandt is probably the least expensive professional quality brand. It's a hard pastel too, like the ones I have. I have this little Rembrandt set that was it's like 12 full sticks and 24 half sticks. And as you saw, I like using Rembrandts. Rembrandts are good at blending other colors together. They're not good at layering over very soft pastels and getting any color out of them, because hard pastels that won't cover up a soft pastel very well, but they'll blend it really well. And Rembrandt will go on just fine over your bare surface, like to start with. A lot of other brands have half stick sets. You can like sign up for the Jerry's Artorama and the Dick Blick, and the Dakota Pastels has the best selection, but they're not the cheapest outlet out there. But sometimes they have sales, and you can get good deals sometimes. There are two sampler sets from two different places that I highly recommend. There's Dakota Pastels has a sampler set, has like several different sampler sets of one stick of each pastel brand that they sell. And so you don't get to pick your colors, but I think you get to pick like the color grouping, like they might have a landscape set or floral set or portrait set. And that's a great deal. I think it's like $40. I don't know, I haven't looked at it lately. But you get like 13 or 14 different sticks of the different brands that they sell. And that's how I discovered that I love Diane Townsend Tirage, which is probably one of the more expensive brands out there. But you get to try, you get to taste each one of them and see which one you like. Because I have my favorites, but when you work, you might have a different sort of style that emerges, and you might like certain pastels. And it's best when you're starting out to like try them all and see. Yeah. And the other sampler sets are from fineartstore.com. They have some pastel. They have some pastel samplers.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And I love your painting. It was so good. It was so fun to watch too.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I'll get working on this, the recording of this, and hopefully in a few days I'll get that emailed out to the 3 of you ladies that bought today. And if you wanna check out my Patreon page, I have a really good deal. If you enjoyed today and you're at all thinking about coming back for another one sometime, you might want to check out my Patreon page, because for $25 a month you get all the invitations. Like Linda comes almost every time. She's one of my patrons on Patreon, and Samia
yes,
just joined. I guess you saw that and said, "Oh, that's an awesome deal." Or for $10 a month, you don't get to come, but you get all the recordings from all the days that I do. So you get to watch the recordings. So if you want to check that out, you can.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks, Rita.
Thanks. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I guess I'll sign out now. And thank you all for coming. It was great having you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.